Guys, there's a Lethal Weapon TV series. Lethal Weapon TV series. Guys, Lethal Weapon TV series. Good fucking Christ, television fucking sucks these days. Celebrated mediocrity is at an all-time high when it comes to television, but what if I told you this was actually nothing new? As HBO completely butchers A Song of Ice and Fire, I'm reminded that they have a history of putting out complete garbage that people praise endlessly. But let's not get ahead of ourselves too quickly. Let's go back a bit further and introduce Image Comics. Spearheaded by Todd McFarlane with some of his buddies, they set out to make comic books that they wanted to make. You knew it was destined to be a bit of a joke, however, when you decided to start your company out with Rob Liefeld. Having said that, I am a big fan of Witchblade and the Darkness, at least I was. I haven't really read them since Julie was killed off by Aphrodite, 4? Because I was kind of getting bored of it all. It started to get repetitive and monotonous. Anyhow, to say Image has done nothing for comics is a bit disingenuous. Image actually can be credited with paving the way for hard narrative to be the driving factor alongside extreme stylization, bombastic art styles, and creating the brooding anti-hero. It's not always great in the story department, but whenever you picked up an issue, you always opened up and saw something badass. The downside to this, yes, as was mentioned, was the brooding anti-hero. Yes, Batman already kind of did it, and so did Daredevil a bit, but it wasn't really a big character trait until Image came around. And they kind of overdid it, and it got boring really fast. Even Jackie had to mix it up every 10 seconds. And as you probably guessed that we're talking about Image Comics, HBO, and from wherever the title is on videos these days, we're talking about Todd McFarlane's Spawn. Yes, that is the title of the show we're talking about. I don't know why it's the title. I mean, I do know why it's the... Just roll the intro. Just roll the intro. Roll the intro.
Funny, he's our man. If you can't kill him, no one can. Yay, funny. S to the P to the A to the 1. S to the P to the A to the 1. Go funny, go funny.
Did you know this show is nominated for an Emmy? Jesus tits. So starting off, we are introduced to some random shit happening, and it takes a long time to happen. I mean, everything in this show goes on forever. Pretty much skipping introducing the story, we immediately start off with Keith David on Earth having no idea what's going on. Al Simmons is a freshly created Hellspawn, and like all new Hellspawn is sent back to Earth to wander around confused and taunted by poorly voice-acted clowns. Supposedly there's some bigger plan involved in all this, but it makes absolutely zero sense, and I can't fathom how it is ever designed to work out. So you've got Al on Earth hanging out in an alley while he bitches about his wife, gets taunted by the world's worst clown, and gets life advice from a fucking hobo. It's basically the first half of the movie spread out over the course of some 6 or so hours in total. And before you go thinking that this is destined to be some heavily stylized, brutal fuckfest of a show, it's not. It's really not. Being that it's HBO, they attempt the fuckfest part, but it really falls flat. It's not even really very violent either. There's plenty of shooting and explosions and even a little dismemberment, but it's incredibly tame. And by tame, I mean it's very obviously pulling that try-hard 90s edgelord shit. Nowhere is it more apparent than when we're introduced to Chapel hanging out at a club, watching the shadow of a lady getting spit roasted at 10 animated frames per second. I mean, it's just awful, and it all goes nowhere. The only reason Chapel was at this club was so he could bang some chick and have a Vietnam flashback, and this show is filled with dumb non sequitur bullshit like that. Format is straight fucked. First off, everyone speaks in slow, monotone voices with awkward pauses every other word. It's supposed to be dramatic, but just comes out incredibly forced and sad. And I mean everyone talks like that. Everybody speaks in a constant monotone with needless pauses. It gets especially grating when Violator decides he's going to monologue in a really shitty voice and then has to force a really shitty cackle, all while animation is like 3 fucking looping frames that get reused a lot, with expressions that don't even match his tone. It's just 10 kinds of disjointed. Excuse me. So, the basic plot is that Spawn is trying to avoid the clown while trying to get Wanda back, while Cagliostro tries to get him to stop being Spawn, while Jason Wynn tries to... I don't really know what he's doing to begin with, but Spawn stole guns from him and suddenly he's all over the place. Wynn hires a cyborg and Chapel to try and kill Spawn, Chapel being the guy who initially killed Al Simmons. Spawn kills the cyborg and drives Chapel nuts. Terry, Al's old friend and Wanda's new husband, stumbles on some shit with Wynn, and so Wynn tries to kill him. There's some mafia guy who does the worst Louis Armstrong impression I've ever heard. Something, Senator's crazy molester son. Turns out Cagliostro was Merlin. Wynn is going after the mask of Genghis Khan, and a lot of crazy people show up in the whole mix. It's incredibly busy. I mean, just straight bogged down. As busy as it all is, there is very little payoff for anything. Spawn spends half of his time bitching and brooding. Clown interrupts him to say Malabolja every third fucking word. Cagliostro keeps telling him to knock it off. Spawn tries to get close to Wanda. Wynn tries to kill Spawn. Chapel babbles like a fucking retard. And Sam and Twitch hang out for a while. It's just this jumbled mess that tries to introduce character arcs that don't have anything to do with each other. Twitch's little storyline happens because he's on to Wynn, but it really has nothing to do with Spawn, except that he stumbles on the shit with Wynn while he's investigating the bodies piling up around Spawn. Terry's story only matters because he's married to Wanda. There's this grating reporter who shows up and goes abso-fucking-lutely nowhere until just randomly she's revealed to be a celestial assassin. Angela is there for all of 2 seconds, and Spawn shapeshifts into Terry and porks Wanda. They show his necroplasm clock/meter a couple of times, but it goes nowhere. They don't do anything with it. So it's some 18 episodes over the course of some 6 hours or so. So there has to be a lot going on, right? There has to be something for it to have been nominated for a goddamn Emmy. Nope! Nothing! Characters have the same slow, moody, monotonous conversations multiple times, and they take up a shitload of time. Scenes that were supposed to be filled with action are just filled with talking, brooding, and worthless flashbacks. For being from the animation renaissance that was the 90s, this show looks like trash. It's some ugly, choppy 15 frames per second, and you pile constantly reusing the same animations on top of constantly having the same conversations over and over again, and it's 6 hours long with about 2 hours worth of content and a shitload of HBO-style fan service. And I don't get it. It came out around the same time as the movie, and looking at the two side by side, it's night and day. Not just from a tonal standpoint, but from a quality standpoint. Say what you want about the movie being cheesy, but you have to admit that it's flat out entertaining. John Leguizamo's Violator is all over the place and genuinely vile. Cagliostro has actual presence, Spawn's brooding has actual payoff, and the story goes somewhere. Malabolja is handled in a way that doesn't really work out, but aside from hell, the CG effects are fantastic. There's a wonderful life and story to the presentation of the movie, which absolutely can't be said about this animated series. Most of it goes absolutely nowhere, and what does go somewhere really should have gone there far sooner. It's monotonous, repetitive, empty. If you think TV sucks super hard these days, I'll remind you that most of the shows you remember from your childhood were on 3 whole channels. If you ever find yourself wondering what the fuck ever happened to television, just remember that in the 90s, the show that made Spawn boring and lazy was nominated for an Emmy. I'm the Necroswanson, and you can go fuck yourselves.